Welcome to Goobertown Hobbies. My name is Brent. Let's paint an army of miniatures. This is a common goal for tabletop gamers, but it's also a ridiculously ambitious goal. There's no way to sugarcoat it. Finishing a Warhammer army is a gargantuan task. In this video, we're going to paint a whole collection of models from beginning to end. We're going to talk about the planning, the painting techniques, the hobby tools, and the sheer power of will that you need to get something like this done. For this project, I'm working with my buddy Casey from eBay Miniature Rescues. Doing this as a team lightens the load and helps with motivation. Spoiler alert, this army took us 100 hours to paint. 50 hours for each of us, and that doesn't include assembly. We're both competent painters, we have good tools, and we know a lot of tricks for being efficient, and it still took a ton of effort. It's a big task, so you want to give yourself every advantage that you can find. This isn't a video about speed painting, at least not exactly. It's more about being economical with our efforts so that we have enough juice to actually complete the marathon. We're going to be creative and clever. We'll use effective shortcuts and we'll spend our time where it really counts. Every army is unique, but this here is a perfectly fine specimen for us to paint as we talk through the process. Imperial Guard, Adeptus Militarum. It's a good mix of characters, troops, and vehicles. Let's get organized and set ourselves up for success. The first thing we did is break out the power tools. We're doing this at Casey's house. Casey has a well-equipped workshop. He's stocked up on paint and hobby supplies, and he has some great work areas. But he didn't have enough painting handles. Painting handles make it easier to hold minis at the perfect angles without putting your fingers in wet paint. Some people paint one mini at a time, and some people paint in batches of 5 or 10. But for this project, we're going a little bit industrial. I want a painting handle for every mini. We're going to do some assembly line batch painting, and that process is most efficient when every miniature has its own handle. These are wooden dowels with a diameter of 1¼ inch, or in metric terms, they have the cross-section of a 32mm base. I'm cutting the wood into 3-inch tall segments. Perfection. Now, let's plan a paint scheme. I'm a big believer in test models. Paint a few models to find a color scheme that you like, and then paint a few more to hammer out a recipe and an order of operations for achieving that scheme. This army took us 100 hours to paint. It would have taken even longer if we didn't have a plan, and it wouldn't have looked as good. It would have been stressful if we were constantly second-guessing ourselves and changing colors. We started by looking for inspiration. I had it in my head that I wanted to paint a blue army, and Casey found some great examples as we were browsing Instagram. Blue as the major color, plus some red accents, is a sweet look. We chose some test models, and we got to work. In a previous video, I talked about different ways to plan a paint scheme. You can start at the end and use logic to work backwards. Or you can start at the beginning and put some paint on your brush and trust your instincts. Alternatively, you can start in the middle. You can base your plan around some core intermediate steps that you're excited about. We had some steps in mind that we knew would do a lot of work. Okay, so we had some images that we liked, and we also had a couple of techniques that we knew we wanted to use. I've been looking for an excuse to use these 3D printed cobblestones. So yep, that's how we'll do the bases. Casey has a way of using an airbrush and silly putty for putting camo stripes onto vehicles. So that's going to be part of the plan too. Another technique that we knew we were going to use is stamps for the squad and regiment markings. This is a new product from Goblin Hobbies, and we are super excited to show this off. It's an alternative to decals or stencils, and it is perfect for situations like this. We're going to use stamps for the squad and regiment markings, and for a bit of flair on the tanks. Any paint plan will have mundane steps like painting belts and pouches, but we also want some steps that are exciting and have a big impact on the wow factor of the models. With these considerations in mind, we worked through some test minis to figure out our favorite version of this general plan. Now is the time to experiment. We can just try things. If we don't like the results, we can paint over and try some other things. In a worst case scenario, we can use the ultrasonic cleaner to strip the paint all the way off and start fresh. We eventually made some test models that we were happy with, and then we kept going and tried adding different types of weathering. The steel stippled onto the armor represents heavy wear and tear, and the weathering pigment dirties them up and ties them in with the bases. We decided that the army would be more striking without heavy layers of weathering, but I'm glad that we investigated a bunch of different looks. We've got our color palette, we know what we're doing, and we know what order we're doing it in. Our plan is reasonably efficient, and it should give a nice look. Time to scale up. This is the army. It was assembled and primed by the guys from the Poor Hammer podcast. The army is a collection of secondhand models from Craigslist and eBay. These models have already appeared on an episode of Poor Hammer. Brad and Eric wanted to prove that secondhand armies could be bought for relatively cheap. Allegedly, 2,000 points of this army cost $500. Everything is relative. This is relatively cheap. Anyway, we're breaking this into big batches. We'll do the troops as one batch, the vehicles as a second batch, and the characters by themselves. Setting the vehicles aside for a moment, let's base the minis. I put white PVA glue over the whole base, and I put on 1 or 2 chunks of these 3D printed cobblestones from Epic Basing. Then, while the glue is still wet, I dunk it in sand to cover the rest of the base. I like the idea of a lost temple in the desert or something like that. Casey's sandbox is a mix of sand and pebbles, so we're getting a good variety onto the bases in a single step. Glue, cobblestones, sand. 1, 2, 3, nice and efficient. We considered the possibility of adding more details to the bases, like maybe some plants, but that's more work and it wouldn't necessarily make things better. I think the models look cool enough with a simple desert ruins theme. When the bases were dry, we used poster putty to stick them onto their painting handles. The handles are going to make everything just a little bit easier. On a related note, we have a nice big table to work on, we've got good lighting, we've got comfy chairs that are reasonably ergonomic, and we've got snacks and music. We've also got all the paints and supplies that we need close at hand. We are organized and set up for success. Now it's time to break out the airbrush. The plan is to use the airbrush to make the blue armor look nice. An airbrush applies smooth coats of paint, and it does it fast. You don't need an airbrush to have fun painting or to finish a big project, but it really is a glorious tool. We've got a huge project ahead of us, so we're using all of the tools at our disposal. From a strategic standpoint, we're currently in the messy phase. Eventually, we'll have to paint neatly and color inside the lines, but not yet. The messy phase is a chance to use quick and dirty techniques to get things started. At this phase of the project, we could use spray paint or hydro dipping or sponging or dry brushing or any other technique that puts paint down fast. The first steps in a paint job are a huge opportunity. It's wise to pick one of these fast, messy techniques to get at least one color started off right. Eventually, this army will have a lot of colors. Blue, brown, gray, black, red, steel, and beyond. But the most important color is blue. It's the color that people will notice, so it's a high priority. We're going to use the airbrush to put down a smooth and even coat of blue. Then we can pick a highlight color of bright blue and give a few squirts from above to give some natural looking color transitions. While we're still in the messy phase, we can switch from the airbrush to a dry brush. Using a sky blue highlight color, we're dry brushing the armor. This gives more color variation to the blue, and it also picks out some of the edges of the armor panels. We're not going to spend the time to edge highlight each of these troopers at the end, so we're taking the opportunity now to slap on some quick highlights with the dry brush. In these early steps, I also wanted to use the airbrush for a second color. The sand is going to be tan. It takes a couple of coats to get an opaque layer of tan over blue, so it'll be much faster if I use the airbrush. I need to be slightly careful not to hit the blue armor. A little overspray is unavoidable, but I think it's worth it because this is much faster than hand painting the bases. Alrighty, now we can switch to a regular paintbrush and start a painting marathon. We've got a lot of boring and straightforward steps in a row here. The fatigues are light brown, the weapons are black, belts, pouches, and boots are dark brown, bedrolls are gray, and some details get picked out with a silver metallic. This represents many days' worth of painting. Now this phase is straightforward, but there's still some strategy here. I paint the hard-to-reach colors before the easy-to-reach colors. I paint the fatigues first. I'm gonna make more mistakes when I'm trying to paint armpits than when I'm painting backpacks and pouches. The fiddly, hard-to-reach areas should be painted first when we're still close to the messy step, and the belts can be painted later when we need to be more careful about coloring inside the lines. Another bit of strategy is using the light brown of the fatigues to undercoat the skin. Eventually, we're going to paint the faces and exposed hands with flesh tones, and it'll look bad if the vibrant blue is visible through a translucent layer of paint. This brown has good coverage, and it's much closer to human skin tones than the blue is. It's easy to add a quick dab of this leather brown to the faces at the same time as we're painting the fatigues. Later on, we can paint each face with a single layer of flesh tone instead of needing 2 or 3 layers to cover up the blue. This will save steps and save time. Proper undercoating is a big part of the strategy for efficient batch painting. If you plan on painting yellow models, undercoating with ochre is a much better choice than undercoating with black. For this army, we could have started by painting everything brown and then brushed on the blue instead. Light brown is an excellent color for an undercoat, and this probably would have been slightly faster, but if we took that route, we would lose the blue highlights that we were able to apply in the messy step. The point is, it pays to be mindful about undercoats and order of operations. Strategy is important, but so is execution. This base coating stage is all about endurance and motivation. For this army, we have 30 regular infantry troops, 10 elite stormtroopers, and a 5-person command squad. The recipes for painting these different units are close enough that we decided to do them all as one big batch of 45 models. This is kinda dangerous. If we lose motivation halfway through, we'll have 0 painted models. It's more common to paint in batches of 5 or 10. If we did that and we stopped halfway through, we'd still probably have about 20 fully painted models, and those finished models might even give us the motivation to keep on going. Painting one squad at a time also gives you the chance to iterate and refine your paint plan a little bit on each cycle. On the other hand, one big batch can be efficient if we're able to power through and actually finish it. It'll make sure that the army looks nice and uniform. I also think that one big batch looks pretty cool on camera. I enjoy the challenge and the spectacle and the ambitious nature of this. And of course, we're doing this as a team. The big batch is well suited for a 2-person assembly line. Now, like I said, the idea for this whole project came from the guys at the Poor Hammer podcast. Brad and Eric have a theory that the optimal way to paint an army is the buddy system. Casey and I are buddies. We motivate each other and help each other out, and we bicker constantly. We're a good team. We're in a friendly competition with 2 other teams. We're doing this as part of a silly YouTube challenge. 3 armies and 3 pairs of buddies. Casey and I are representing the Paint Bravely podcast, and we're working on these Imperial Guard. Kieran and Kieran from The Kieran Show are working on Chaos Space Marines, and Brad and Eric from Poor Hammer are working on some Leagues of Votann Space Dwarves. All of this is just another form of motivation. Lots of people paint armies so that they'll be ready in time for a game or a tournament. We want to finish our armies so that we can show them off to our friends. In this case, we have a stupid YouTube challenge going on, and that's good enough. Find motivation wherever you can. Alrighty, we pushed through some monotonous base coating steps, and we've made it to an awesome step. We're going to use these new Goblin Hobby stamps to add squad and regiment markings to the troops. Here's how it works. These steel plates are etched with a bunch of designs that can be used for anything from unit markings to heraldry to signage to graffiti and beyond. Pick a design and then put down a bit of Stampin' Color paint. Grab a plastic card and scrape away the excess. Working quickly, switch to a silicone stamper and pick up the design with a light roll of the wrist. If it's looking good on the stamper, we can go ahead and press that design wherever we want it. This process is called pad printing, and it's a common choice for curved surfaces like printing designs on bowls or labels on the handles of paintbrushes or squad markings on the shoulder pads of miniatures. The heads of these stampers are just sticky enough to pick up the wet paint, but still allow it to transfer to the models. The squishiness of the silicone also allows it to work on curved surfaces. This is the same tech as nail stamps. If it can work on nails, well, it can work on the shields and shoulder pads of your favorite miniatures. There's a learning curve to using these stamps, but once it clicks and you get the knack of it, they can be a powerful tool. The designs look painted on because they are. There are no plastic sheets to fight against you the way that there are for decals. These stamps can have finer details than stencils, and they also don't have the island problem that stencils have. The eyes on the skulls or the center of the zero would be difficult to do with a stencil. The steel Stampin' Plates are durable and infinitely reusable. Once you find a design that you like, you'll never run out of it. We got Casey set up doing some time trials. Each trooper is going to get a red diamond and a gray 108 on their left shoulder pad. Each squad is getting a different Roman numeral on their right shoulder pad. That's 3 stamps on each trooper or 30 stamps for a squad of 10. Between each use, Casey wipes the plate clean with a bit of acetone. He's got his system down. It takes him about 15 minutes to do a squad, which is 2 stamps per minute. That's faster than stencils or decals or freehand, and the results look great. Full disclosure, Goblin Hobbies is a company that was founded by the two of us, and these stampin' kits are going up for sale very, very soon. GoblinHobbies.com. Go check it out and get yourself some free Goblin STLs. One of the reasons that Casey and I accepted this Army Paintin' YouTube challenge was because it would be a great opportunity to test out our new stamps. From the very beginning, these Goblin Hobbies stamps were a core part of our paint plan for this army. This one step is taking the models from a simple base coat to something that we can be proud of. The quality and intentionality of these squad markings lend credibility to the rest of the paint job. These stamps are elevating the minis. If you're painting an army, I recommend that you build your recipe around 1 or 2 really effective power moves. You're always going to have hours of mundane base coating, but there should also be some clever and exciting steps in there. Find something that'll add a wow factor to the army and make it stand out. This core move could be an epic color blend, or an oil wash, or a weathering technique, or any other high-impact step that gives your army its character. When I talk about planning a paint scheme from the middle out, this is what I'm talking about. Choose a strong technique and use it as a core pillar of your plan. Speaking of core steps that really zazz up the army, let's paint some tanks. Once again, we're using the airbrush to put some muscle behind the messy phase. Casey is also making a video about this project, and he'll have more to say about painting vehicles over on the eBay Miniature Rescues channel. He started by painting some beautiful blue tanks. He's using a few different shades of blue to put down an alternating pattern of light and dark that amps up the visual interest. These look great, but the step that we're really excited about is the Silly Putty camo stripes. Casey gave each tank 2 or 3 wraps with a hunk of Silly Putty. Silly Putty is a useful mask for models because it's easy to shape and it can be removed without damaging the paint underneath. Silly Putty does flow over time though, so it's important to work fast before the mask starts to sag. The blue under the putty is going to be protected, and we're masking about half of the surface area of each tank. For the second color, we chose Wolf Gray, which is a bluish light gray that pairs nicely with the original vibrant blue. We got that sprayed onto the exposed surfaces. We removed the putty, and yeah, this looks really cool. The organic shapes from the putty make a great looking camo effect. Casey experimented a little with the masking patterns for each tank, but it turned out that there were no wrong answers. These all look great. This is a simple technique that gives incredible results. Again, it pays to plan your scheme around at least one powerful step that's worth getting excited about. The messy phase at the start of a project is an opportunity, and we did not waste that opportunity. The airbrush is a useful tool, but that's doubly true when it comes to painting vehicles. I painted the treads, gun barrels, and other details with a regular paintbrush, and that took much, much longer. Casey got to use the airbrush one more time for some red accents. We used tape to mask off some straight lines for some stripes and diamonds. The red accent color was an idea that we got from folks on Instagram, and I think it's a great touch. Removing the mask is always an exciting moment, and yeah, this is working. I got back to work on painting details on the tanks while Casey did some more stamping. Stamping the troops was all about making uniforms, but stamping the tanks ended up being about customization. We had a lot of fun with this. We gave the tanks heraldry and animal mascots. Lions and eagles and dragons and even a crab. A lot of the hatches and panels on the tanks got danger signs warning about high voltage or radioactive materials. We even put tally marks onto the tanks as kill counts to record their victories. So painting an army is a ton of work, and a lot of it is going to be straightforward and monotonous. But there are also times when you should give yourself permission to slow down and be creative. These tanks don't need to be identical. It's more fun to imagine that the crews of each of these tanks love their machines, and they're going to give them some personality. Each of these tanks deserves some customization. We had 2 Leman Russ models with a tank commander sticking out of the turret, so we chopped one of those up and found a perfect alternative head and arm. We also had an idea to paint up a halfling sniper to ride around on one of the Rogel Dorn tanks. This model is from Victoria Miniatures, and we've named him Commander Beatus. 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 So I spent a couple of hours just painting a halfling that's not even an official part of this army list. Worth it. Completely worth it. As we were customizing, we wanted to test how precise and detailed these stamps could be. This QR code stamped a little bit crooked. It still registers on Casey's phone, but not on mine. I'm curious whether or not it works on your phone. Does it? Speaking of custom tanks, the guys at Poor Hammer sent us one of the worst pieces of junk from eBay that Casey or I had ever seen. This Chimera or Hellhound or whatever it's supposed to be is broken and malformed and covered in way too many layers of paint. Casey spent a day stripping it down, rebuilding it, and turning it into an awesome part of this army. He weathered it up to make it look like the oldest veteran on the battlefield. This hobby is about more than just assembly lines. Batch painting can give us the efficiency to actually finish an army project of this size, but taking the time to do some customization adds that extra layer of love and joy to these models. Okay, so the troops and the tanks are in good shape. Now it's time for the characters. Gaunt's ghosts all have camo capes, so we started them off with the same silly putty technique. This time we used a total of 3 colors for the camo. I think in the books the ghosts are more gray and green, but these ones are blue. I painted up the 6 ghosts, while Casey painted Ursula Creed and the dude on the mechanical horse. We reused some of the steps and techniques from the rest of the army, but of course the characters are all gonna be a little bit different. The sergeants and the commander are worth showing off too. The caution stripes or checkered pattern on the chainswords are the result of stamping on the pattern with white and then adding translucent yellow and orange ink over the top. For the power sword, we made a black and white gradient and we stamped on runes with white. Then we covered everything with translucent orange. This looks cool. Okay, the end is in sight. One of the last things I do is a single pass to fix the worst mistakes. When I'm batch painting, I don't fix mistakes as I'm going because that really slows things down, and some mistakes don't end up mattering as much as you think they do. If a mistake is big enough to be worth fixing, then I'll catch it during this final pass. Then it's time to paint the base rims. I like using the airbrush to do this. A smooth and even coat of black on the base rims looks clean and professional. The nice thing about this technique is that any overspray of black is just going to look like a dark shadow, and it might actually be a good thing. We had thought about adding a brown wash to the bases, but as it turned out, just a bit of this black shadow on the underside of the sand and pebbles was perfect. Mostly bone color with just a little bit of shadow. The simplicity and the efficiency here really make me happy. Okay, let's get all of these varnished and take a look. This looks like a success. This is basically what we had in mind, and it turned out great. I love it. It took a ton of work, but that's what makes this such a cool achievement. Of course, as I'm looking back at the footage, I can see hours and hours worth of unpainted details. But that's okay. I think we found a sweet spot of a nice looking army for a reasonable amount of effort. The guys at Poor Hammer proposed this YouTube collaboration challenge thingy as a way to test whether the buddy system was a good way to get painted armies onto the table. Painting an army is daunting, but with 2 people, it's a bit more manageable. The theory was that maybe 2 buddies could get together and paint one of their armies over a weekend. Then they take a week or 2 off to recuperate, and then get back together to paint a second army on another weekend. Interesting idea, But nah, it turns out that painting half of an army is still a massive undertaking. Casey and I did a poor job of timekeeping, but it was close to 50 hours per person. Brad and Eric from Poor Hammer are publishing a video about painting Leagues of Votann, and Kieran and Kieran from The Kieran Show are going to share their experience painting Chaos Space Marines. I'm excited to see their stories. There are lots of videos on the internet about speed painting, but completing a whole Warhammer army will always be ambitious, and it will always require a big old chunk of time. It's a really cool achievement though, and this is awesome. Working with a partner certainly has some benefits. You get to combine your skills and learn from each other. Casey is publishing a video on eBay Miniature Rescues about rescuing these tanks, and especially this tank. He's also become quite talented with these Goblin Hobby stamps, and he's got more to say about those too. Most of the models in the army were a combined effort between Casey and myself, but on some of these characters, you can tell which of us painted each model. Casey's style is a bit more gritty and realistic, while I tend to favor brighter and more cartoony. We also have different ways of painting faces and eyes. On the whole, I think that we're a compatible painting team, but not every duo necessarily will be. The buddy system is decently productive, but the best part of the buddy system is that you get to hang out with your buddy. Painting miniatures can be as solitary or as social as you want it to be. I spent more than a week squatting at Casey's house, hanging out, and painting minis. Big thanks to the family for putting up with me. Okay, so who gets this army? Well, we're sending it back to Poor Hammer HQ. Those guys actually play Warhammer 40k, and it makes me happy that this army is gonna have a chance to roll into battle. It had been a while since I did a big dumb YouTube challenge. When the lads contacted us and threw down the gauntlet, well, it felt like we were getting pulled out of retirement for one last job. It was time to suit up again and show the youngins how a mini paintin' YouTube challenge collaboration is done. Poor Hammer and the Kiorans both painted some wonderful armies, but the 108th Mobile Blueberries are unbeatable. They cannot be beaten. I can see this force rolling right up to goblinhobbies.com to learn more about stampin' kits and to get themselves some free Goblin STLs. Alrighty, I hope you enjoyed this, and I hope that you'll check out the other videos in this series. That's all for this time. Thanks so much for watching.